Hey everyone, this is episode 2 of I Am a Park Ranger at Wolf Lake National Park. If you missed the first part, the video will be linked in the top of the description. Thanks. Phil dropped me off back at the cabin. The ATV split the forest faster than I thought it could. It had to be 750cc at the least. I couldn't help but think this would make a quick getaway from something. As we pulled up outside my isolated accommodation, Phil asked me how I was settling in. I told him the cabin was lovely. It can feel a little vulnerable on a dark night, however. And Phil chuckled to himself. Dang, I don't think I'll ever meet a rookie who doesn't think Jason Voorhees is trying to climb through his windows on the first few nights. Relax, kid. It'll pass and soon. This will be the only place that you feel safe. He ended his sentence by looking over the property, and before returning to meet my gaze and giving me a reassuring smile. I hope so, Phil. The first night didn't exactly settle my nerves. Phil screwed up a little with concern when he heard how genuine my fear was. That bad, he cried. Just a bad dream. Reading about some weird case back in the 2000s and it just got in my head. I tried to play it down. I didn't want Phil thinking I scared easily. Clearly, you needed a strong constitution to last here at Wolf Lake. Phil's brow furrowed as he looked away at the floor, biting his lip in concentration. Here, what case would that be? He asked in a manner that, in fact, maybe, he knew the one that I was talking about. I rubbed my tired face and scratched my stubble. Some kid who just vanished. The dogs led a search team up a cliff and into the woods but never found him. In creepy circumstances the night before. Claims that he saw a man in the trees who tried to lure him out. 2003, 2004 maybe. I stated it as more of a question to see if it prompted anything in Phil's memory, as he would have worked here at the time. Davey, no, Danny, yeah, Danny. He began to rhythmically snap his fingers, trying to jog his memory. I helped him out with the surname. Waldron. Danny Waldron. That's it, Waldron. Oh Christ, yeah, I remember that. The names fade over the years with my age and everything, but the details never go away. He said as he picked dirt from under his fingernails. I tensed my jaw as I reluctantly brought up the radio call at the tower. Listen, I'm sorry about eavesdropping earlier. That was meant to be private and I should have respected that. I wasn't good at apologies, but that came out better than I had expected. Phil scoffed and smiled at me. It's okay, kid. I think anyone would have done the same thing. Man, you're coming to help with the search tomorrow anyway. You'll know everything by tomorrow. I just didn't want to overwhelm you on your first day, he said with that same reassuring tone. I couldn't wait until tomorrow, though. I wanted details, and I wanted them now. What happened to the adults, Phil? I asked in a tone that almost demanded an answer. Phil checked his watch to make sure he had another time. This was obviously going to be a story with depth. If we're going to do this now, James, then you better stick that kettle on, kid, he said, nodding towards the cabin door. Phil sat at the little kitchen dining room table I had in my eating quarters. He scanned the room, admiring the fresh look to my new digs, while I was at the counter pouring us 2 cups of coffee. No whiskey in these, though, unfortunately. As I dealt the cups to the coaster, he began his story. He placed both hands around the warm mug and blew the steam away, before taking a swig of the hot coffee. The adults were found dead, as you heard. But the thing is, they were found in a certain way. This case is just one of many that fit a certain profile. Phil began, trying to choose his words carefully. Profile? What, like a serial killer sort of thing? That's what the police think, isn't it? I quizzed. Yeah, I guess you could call it a modus operandi, I suppose. You see, people go missing and die all the time out here. It sounds grim, but it is what it is. A dangerous place. Lots of wolves, bears, all that stuff. And then of course you got poison ivy, cliffs, gorges, a loose rock. There's honestly a million ways to meet your end out here. But every year we get the really baffling search and rescue cases, like Danny Waldron for example. Just stuff we simply can't explain. Things that cannot be chalked up to natural causes. It keeps you up at night, that's for sure. I mean, these sorts of cases, god dang it, what you find left of these people, it can't just be written off as a freak of nature or anything rational. Something malevolent stalked these people and it had its way with them. You see, what happens, James, is we get these types of cases every year, and the factors are all similar. Meaning that either this is just some messed up coincidence, or this stuff was done by the same thing, and me and all the boys know it's not a goddamn coincidence. So, the obvious conclusion is a serial killer. So that's what the police are going with. But I think everyone knows it isn't that simple. And very soon, I think you will too. Phil, what is going on out here? None of this is making any sense, I asked, trying to get my head around all this innuendo without really thinking ahead. My logic was overlooking the fact that it would be dark soon and I would be alone, all by myself in this cabin. I know, kid, I'm sorry. It's hard to explain how Wolf Lake works over just one coffee. He smiled, shaking his head. He slurped his coffee and then he continued. Okay, so it usually happens to families. The family, consisting of at least 2 adults and 1 child, sets up camp. The ranger, who is their liaison and working their trail, checks in with them each day, making sure that they are all okay. Each time said ranger visits them, the mood in camp gets a little more tense, like they haven't slept much or they're all on edge. Every time, someone in the group will say something, hinting that one of the children had noticed someone in the vicinity of the camp, lurking in the tree line. We don't get an accurate description most of the time, just that it sounded like a male, or they consistently say that the person whispers to them, trying to lure them into the woods. The kid will usually tell the adults and they will go looking, but they never find anything. And then, one morning, said ranger heads up and finds them gone. One of 2 scenarios occur. Either the whole family is gone, missing, or the adults are in the woods shouting, screaming, panicking that their child is missing. The kids, we never find them. If the adults are still present, then the kid is taken quietly, vanishing quietly into the night. However, when the whole family is gone, it's a totally different story. Camp seems to show signs of extreme struggle. Rip and tear marks in the tent, drag marks in the dirt. Sometimes we find fingernails. They look to have been broken off, like if you scraped them down a wall. They have seemingly been taken by force. We have never recovered a child, dead or alive, under these circumstances. The adults, though, we found every one of them. They are never far because they are put where everybody can see them. Phil finished his sentence, staring blankly into the half-drunk coffee, gently shaking his head, before clenching his eyes shut, trying to block out the images now flashing in his mind. Find them ripped to shreds, and what's left gets hung up in the tree. Honestly, we had a lad once who was convinced the predator had come to hunt at Wolf Lake. Jokes aside though, something with a lot of hate in its twisted soul took these people. Whatever it is or where it goes, it takes the family, but keeps the children. He stared into my eyes, as if waiting for me to slap my letter of resignation on the table. I honestly didn't know where to begin. I shared Phil's resent for our own empathy, as we both sat imagining the horror that befell itself on these people during the night, ripping children's parents from their tents and dragging them into the woods, before coming back to snatch them and take them to a place that little children should never go. You said that it follows a pattern. Why don't you just warn the families when the kids begin to see the entity? I said, genuinely confused this isn't being done. Phil scoffed and smiled at my boldness. You don't think that's what we want to do? Hazard control. They pay us a large sum of money each year to keep our mouths shut. Didn't you read your contract? It's half terms of employment, half a non-disclosure agreement, he asked, cocking his head like a dog. Of course I did. I rolled my eyes into answering in such a fashion that he knew damn well I didn't. At least, I now knew what that money was for. Hazard control run point on these sorts of cases. They're a real shady bunch. No telling the lengths that they would go to. The kid that I had before you, Billy, a nice kid like you, worked like a dog and people loved him. But he didn't get the memo about keeping his mouth shut. He lost his head a little bit. It took over and I told him to get a check on it. I don't think he listened though, he said, shaking his head, eyes looking up. What happened to him? I asked, unsure if I wanted to know. Virginia, apparently. Just one day, he didn't show up for work. I went to his cabin, his stuff was gone. I asked where he was, and that's what head office tells us. Virginia. We tried to call, but his number is out of use now. No calls and no texts, no letters. Nothing. I sat back in my chair, slumping into it. I ran a hand through my hair. Phil sensed my anxiety. Hey, look. He might actually be in Virginia. I'm just saying, keep your mouth shut. And don't mention Billy to anyone, just in case. 'Cause I like you, kid, he said with a fatherly wink. I smiled. Phil gave the vibe of a strong male role model. My time in Wolf Lake was squaring up to be a little darker than I had anticipated. At least I now knew who the lady at head office was talking about when she had slipped up at my interview. HQ clearly wanted to keep Billy quiet. Something was definitely fishy there, but I knew if I followed Phil's guidance and kept my head down, I would be okay. But something didn't quite make sense though, so I questioned Phil further while he was in an answering mood. So why on earth don't Hazard Control want us to protect the people who come here? I asked as Phil necked the last of the lukewarm coffee. He swished it around in his mouth as he stared into the bottom of the cup. He swallowed and sighed. I don't know. They have their reasons and we have our theories. Tourism's a big moneymaker. Wolf Lake isn't a big place. The national park brings in over $29 million a year in revenue for the whole town. Food, fuel, accommodation, supplies. $32 billion last year for the entire US economy. People start getting told that they have to pack up because some forest boogeyman is trying to snatch their kids. Then that figure is going to be a hell of a lot lower. Money makes everyone expendable. Phil shook his head at how true his finishing sentence was. But that still doesn't make sense, because surely the details of what's happening would find their way into the news. People still come to visit here. Phil scoffed at my naivety. The news. You think the HC would let what really happens in this forest get to the news or the tabloids? No, the news never gets the full picture. They either get the bare bones of it, or they get some total complete cover story. It's completely HC's discretion what gets into the public eye. The police will assist us on these search and rescues, as well as any suspicious deaths. So they know there's some sort of foul play involved. But HC doesn't want the truth coming out. Serial killers are bad for business, you know. He said with that same playful sarcasm that I was beginning to warm to. But you don't think it's a serial killer? I asked, almost like a gossip-hungry housewife. Don't get me wrong, I can see why the police think so. But there's so much hazard control covers up. They are protecting a very dark secret, James. In fact, let's take Danny Waldron for example. I think the tabloid said he was walking around a corner and potentially fell in some water. The sniffer dogs, however, led search team up a rock face and into a woodland area, but there was never a trace. Is that right? I closed my eyes and tried to remember the article. Yeah, I think that's it. He slapped his knees and bit his lips with a smile. He shook his head. You see, the police, under guidance from the hazard control, ruled his death as a suspected drowning. But believe me, a lot of stuff was held back from the press. Stuff that would have fueled your nightmare last night into Turbo Drive. Phil declared with a drawn-out look in his eye. Again, I would come to regret this question. What really happened, Phil? Where is Danny Waldron? I asked with a pit in my stomach. Phil began to chew his bottom lip harder, weighing up if he should disclose the details. He extended his neck, getting a better vantage point so he could look out each window, making sure no one was going to walk in and hear us. The papers are correct in saying that it happened on the path down by the stream. If I'm correct in my memory though, the papers said once the dogs led us up the rock face, that they led us into some woodland. The dogs tracked him to a clearing and then they lost the trail, yeah. His eyes slightly widened, shoulders shrugged and he nodded slightly, as if wanting my confirmation of the fact. I told him that was correct, that it was what the papers had said. Wrong. We found a trace. The dogs found what they were looking for. It's true. We had tracked Danny 34 miles or so into the woods. The dogs came to a clearing and Phil bit his tongue, driving his gaze to the floor in disgust. He rolled his back up to my eye level and he sighed. We found the kid's underwear. A little patch of upturned dirt in the middle of the clearing. The dogs started pawing at it and before you know it, they have their nose deep in this hole. One of the police officers gloved up and pulled out what was in the hole. A small white Y-front underwear for ages 5 to 6. Phil sniffed the moisture in his nostrils back into his throat before taking a gulp. He looked on the verge of vomiting. I mean, we were all fathers, you know. Every single one of us were thinking about where this little boy was and what had taken him. And then we started to think, what if he was our son? Just some things are hard to shrug off. I looked blankly at the tabletop, defeated. Jesus, Phil, I don't. I turned my palms upwards with a gone-out expression on my face. I don't know what to say. That's horrible. I managed to fumble past my horror and disbelief, so I could finish my sentence. Phil didn't look like he was finished, however. We never told his parents what we had found. HC had gagged all of us, but I don't think any of us wanted it anyway. There was something else, though. Something else that wasn't in the public domain. There was a witness, Phil declared, making me sit up straight. A witness to Danny going missing. Phil nodded. Wendy Cartwright, 42 years old, a nice lady, was out hiking with her husband Barry. She had broken off from Barry to use the bathroom, so she went into the woods to go behind a tree. These being the woods that we had tracked Danny into. She saw something. Phil looked at a loss for a word that was better than what he used. Something, I prompted. Not someone. I'll tell you what, James. I'll let you decide. Phil offered, as he didn't know how to answer himself. I sat up straight again, making sure I was listening to all the details of the witness's story. Wendy Cartwright said that she was just finished doing a number 1 behind this tree when she had heard noises, twigs snapping, leaves rustling, etc. and it started off way in the distance, but then it was getting closer and closer. She didn't want to be caught with her pants down, literally, so she began to finish up and pull up her trousers. When she looks up, she sees it. Running in and out of the trees heading east is a figure. It's carrying something though. Wendy steps closer to the figure's path of movement so she can get a better view. She figured this person is running because someone has hurt her in danger maybe, so she moved towards it in case she could offer any assistance. This is when the figure shows itself not to be running. Not traditionally anyway. Mrs. Cartwright's actual words were, "He was tiptoeing, but like at running speed." Apparently, he looked exactly like a cartoon when they're trying to make very little noise, you know. Like that, but extremely fast. The figure isn't facing her at this point. Its face is blocked by the object that it is carrying over its shoulder. Mrs. Cartwright said it was a young child around 5 years old. She said the child was kicking his legs, had his arms reached out in the direction they were running from, and was screaming his lungs out. Except one thing. No sound was coming from the boy. I mean James. This woman was saying this kid was teary, red-faced. He had all the expressions that go with someone screaming for their life. But honestly, if she would have been looking the other way, she wouldn't have known he was there. Jesus, what the hell, Phil? What did she do? I asked in disbelief. She thought the child was hurt, maybe suffering from some sort of anaphylactic shock, and the father was running to get him to a medic. So, as the figure passed right by her, she called out, asking if everything was okay. She said the figure stopped as fast as it was moving, like someone had just paused the cartoon, just froze in the position it stopped. She said after a few seconds, this figure just rotated on the toe it was standing on, until it faced her. Its face was revealed to her like some sort of sick prize in a game show. I didn't speak. I just sat there, mesmerized, waiting for the next horrifying chapter in this poor woman's ordeal. Phil took a moment to try to find the best way to articulate what came next. Poor woman didn't know how to tell us what she saw. The best she could say was this figure turned to her the way it did, and it was grinning wildly from the moment it began to turn, like it was wildly excited for something. Its eyes were wild and were again cartoonish, so were its huge teeth. She said it looked like it had no business here. Its figure was like a thick black smudge of shading, and its features, they were like a child had drawn them and stuck them on. She was just stood there, lost in its stare. And then it brought a hand up to its face and put its finger over its mouth. And she swears blind that she heard a voice in her head say, "Shh." And then it rotated back the way it came until she could just see the child again. And then it was like the play button had been pressed, and the figure carried on tiptoeing rapidly into the forest. She said she wanted to ask the figure what it was doing with the child, or even ask the child if it was okay. But something deep down inside her most primal instincts told her to just stay still and quiet. I'm not sure what would have happened if she had done that or said anything, but she's here to tell that tale, and Danny Waldron isn't. She had told us that tale, begging us to believe it. So we were about to pass it to the police, but immediately, HC were on the scene to stop us. They took Wendy Cartwright into a trailer to retake her statement, so they could give it to the police. She spoke to them, and then left, and the next thing we know, that version of events you read in the paper, that is what we're being told to feed to the police and the public. So, while to the outside world, Danny's disappearance is still questionable, at least now, most people will likely think he simply fell into the water, and our sniffer dogs were just having a bad day. After he finished this horrific story, Phil took a sigh of relief. He rested his forehead on the palm of his hand, propping his elbow up against the table. He looked in need of a few seconds to his head together. He and the other rangers clearly carry a lot of the dark incidents that occur in these woods around with them. I think he was glad that he had another ranger to work close with, so we could share the burden. Holy Mother of God, but come on, surely Wendy Cartwright told her story to the press. Unless, oh wait, you don't think Hazard Control, sent her to Virginia? I asked with shifty eyes and air quotes. Phil scoffed at my timid nature and shook his head playfully. No, they didn't. I may not have seen or spoke to her directly, but she is alive. Her and her husband moved away from Wolf Lake in June 2004. Mark Higgins, that's my gaffer, he was the one who took her statement that day. When the edited story came out, he went to see her husband, asking him what she told the hazard control team regarding what she saw. So, what did she say? According to the husband, his wife told them exactly what she told us, every last detail. She said that she sat in front of what you might call a panel, and then she said the three men who were interviewing her, they just looked at one another and were whispering into each other's ears. She said that she sat there awkwardly while they conferred between themselves, until they seemed to nod in agreement and returned to face her. Phil took a pause and kissed his teeth in disgust. Those sick people. What, Phil? What did they do? I asked. Apparently, when Higgins asked the husband that same question, Mr. Cartwright got very upset and started becoming hostile towards him, telling him to just stay away from them, saying, and I quote, "Our lot had threatened her enough. Please leave them alone." It took him a while, but he managed to calm him down and convince him that we had no part in it. Phil took a break, shook his head in disgust, and continued. Those sickos, they dug up her past. She had a history of mental health issues and alcoholism. Her baby died from a cot death when it was 9 months old. They started to accuse her of being drunk, delusional, attention-seeking. So desperate to feel a connection to her own lost child, that she would make up some sick story to insert herself into the investigation of a missing boy. They made her feel about 2 inches tall, and gave her the impression if she continued telling her story, then she would be made out to be some sort of a drunk and grieving lunatic. As I said, they packed up and left town shortly after. I didn't respond verbally. I just widened my eyes in shock, filled my cheeks with air, and blew the air in and out in a speechless daze. Phil was just studying me, nodding his head as if to agree with my reaction. Before we could say another word to each other, Phil's radio crackled to life again, jolting us in our seats. It was a man, a conservative voice, asking for Phil. He put the receiver to his mouth and pressed the button. "Hey, Richard, yeah, I'm here," Phil said. "I'm outside your tower. The bike's gone. I assume you're not here," the voice said in a condescending manner. "Just that it's 4 p.m. and we had an appointment. Didn't we, Phil?" Phil made sure that he didn't have his thumb on the button, waiting until he mouthed the word, asshole to me. We chuckled to ourselves. Moments of light were valuable in what was becoming a very dark place. Phil composed himself and pressed the button down. "No, I was just doing the new lad's induction. Give me 10 minutes, Rich. I'll set off now." Phil spoke into the radio while rolling his eyes at me. "Oh yes, Mr. James Adam Parker. I hope you've shown him the ropes, Philip. Advised him on how to become an established member of staff here with the National Park Agency. Shown him how things work." Phil shot me an intense look while he replied to Richard. "Yeah, he knows when to speak and when not to, and who not to. He's a good one, Rich. I like him." Phil shot that familiar fatherly wink as he finished his response. "Well, good, because he will be shadowing you tomorrow. We'll be expanding the search for the missing children. So, young Mr. Parker needs to know what to do if anything should come up. Or perhaps I should say, what not to do. Richard's cold voice never once fluctuated in tone, other than when enunciating the word not. Phil shook his head in disagreement, despite Richard not being able to see him do it. Absolutely not, Rich. He knows the score. Just get back here. I need to talk to you about the case. The police will be there tomorrow, and I need to make sure you have your lines rehearsed. Richard had about as much manners as he did emotions. Phil shook his head at his rudeness and put the radio back in his holster on his waist belt. He stood up, put the chair back under the table, and went to rinse his cup in the sink. I'll tell you, kid, that Richard, he's a real piece of work. Tomorrow, if you see or find anything at all, best that you just come to me, yeah? I don't want Richard or the rest of them guys thinking you're someone who can't play by the rules, he said, as he looked out the kitchen window and into the dense woods. Nightfall was nearing. I assured Phil that I would keep my head down and follow orders tomorrow. He grabbed my shoulder in approval. You'll be fine, kid. You just worry about doing your job. Let me and the others worry about all this nonsense, he added as he exited my cabin, mounted his ATV, fired it to life, and with a wave over his shoulder, he flew into the woods, swallowed up by the dense mass of bark and green. I was once again alone with the details of what Phil had confessed to me at the kitchen table. Over the next hour or so, the dulling blue sky was washed over with sheer black night, plunging my cabin into an endless abyss. I had every lamp switched on and decided to turn on the TV for comfort. I sat on the edge of the bed's foot, untying my laces on my dusty hiking boots. As I was embracing the mild euphoria that came with the pressure loosening off my exhausted feet, the TV on the cabinet to my right was on Channel 1, showing an episode of police car chases. My attention was grabbed when the station suddenly turned to Channel 4. I looked at the remote that sat on the kitchen table, a whole 10 yards away. I turned my head slowly back to the TV, almost sheepishly. I saw the channel that was now on was showing a breaking news bulletin. The images on screen showed a number of police and forest officials rolling a number of stretchers carrying body bags out of a wooded area and into a fielded clearing. The fielded clearing had a number of several white tents erected, and numerous forensic investigators in white overalls, all going about their duties. The tagline had made my head jolt. It read, "Tragedy at Wolf Lake National Park." This was the news story that was covering the missing children and murdered adults. I read the small banner that was presenting bullet points on the key events of the day. They read, Robertson family were reported missing this morning. Adult bodies found this afternoon. Children still missing. Authorities suspect animal attack. I was puzzled as Phil told me the adults were found dangling from a tree, hanging there with signs of extreme violence to their bodies. What sort of animal can do that? There was also nothing about these signs of a struggle found at the campsite. The news reporter began detailing that the family were suspected to have gone for a morning hike, trekked into a more gnarlier part of the woods and encountered one or more predators. She then said it suspected that the children were encouraged to run for safety by the adults, while they tried to fend off the predators. And then, in an unfortunate sequence of events, the parents had succumbed to the animals and now the children are lost in the woods. The news reporter then stood next to a man. This man was dressed like a government official. He was a pair of sunglasses short of the Men in Black look. His expression was pure apathy. I felt a puff of air escape my nostrils as I chuckled to myself. I thought to myself that, if this isn't Richard, I'll sleep in the woods tonight. As soon as the name banner came on, I congratulated myself on a successful guess. Richard Hopkins in the flesh. The news reporter told the viewers that she was standing with the head office representative for Wolf Lake National Park, that he is here tonight to give us the latest on the incident. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Well, I could, as Phil had told me what Richard and his department to do with the truth. But to actually see it in practice was a different thing entirely. Richard told the viewers that foul play was completely out of the question. He said he has every faith that the children are still alive and are just in the forest, lost and scared. But he says the best search and rescue officers in the area are on the case. He promised that the adults' heroic sacrifices in order to save their children would not be in vain. The reporter thanked him for his time, and she then began to talk about the family's close friends and show previously recorded interviews of those friends and other relatives, saying nice things about them and talking about how devastated they were to hear the news. Meanwhile, I sat there on the end of the bed, shocked about how much the hazard control team covered up the grisly facts. No mention that something came into the camp and violently tore open the tents. No mention that the adults were hung on a tree with a rope after they were skinned and gutted. And certainly, no mention that they know well we won't ever find those missing kids. I was sat, struggling to wonder why they are so desperate to hide these details, when all of a sudden, the reporter said something that caught my ear. I turned my attention back to the news broadcast. I listened to the woman speak. This whole event and the horrifying loss resulting from it is just another tragic story to add to the dark history of Wolf Lake. This is just one of a number of cases where a family has met a saddening end under similar circumstances. And also, this is not the first time that a large-scale search for missing children has occurred in these woods. The park has ensured the public that no foul play is suspected, but they have urged all visitors when attending a national park to make sure you follow all safety briefings and instructions handed down by the park rangers, as the woods can be a highly dangerous place should this guidance not be followed. The way the reporter tensed her cheeks when she said the words "dark history" made me lean forward and lock my fingers together in concentration. A series of images overrode the female reporter. First, a picture of a disgusting-looking man came on the screen. It was a police mugshot from 1991. The man was skinny, yet had a huge belly. He had long, greasy, dark hair that receded at the front and grew into a mullet at the back. His eyes were intense, like he was a starving man looking at a steak. His fingernails were overgrown and brittle. That image was then replaced with a series of missing persons posters of various children. As these images were shown, the woman spoke again. These children going missing in the forest and the resulting panic will be an all but unwanted reminder for most Wolf Lake parents, as it brings back memories of one man's reign of terror that plagued this town for nearly 6 years. The National Park of Wolf Lake and the surrounding area gained a significant degree of notoriety when Edward Keller, aka the Burger Man, tortured the families of this quiet southern Colorado town. Keller was a sadistic, cannibalistic person who was responsible for the deaths of 18 adults and 19 children until his death in 2002. Once the police had discovered his identity, he went on the run. After an extensive 2-day search of the town and the park, authorities found Keller in the forest, deceased, hanging from a tree. People from all over the country come here every year to experience the gorgeous scenery and eye-catching woodland of Wolf Lake. However, the area gets visits from its fair share of paranormal investigators and enthusiasts too, given the town and park's ongoing dark legacy. Live from Wolf Lake National Park, I'm Holly Weston, Channel 4 News. I leaned over the bed to grab the remote and turned off the TV. Here we go again, my mind was in overdrive. I dived into the stack of newspapers from which I had found the story of Danny Waldron. I was looking for any paper between 1997 and 2003. I spent around 7 minutes staring from top to bottom, throwing any paper that seemed to catch my eye, intently looking for keywords on the front page such as missing, murder, Keller, etc. I had a stack of papers now piling up on the bed. They were the ones I believed would have the information I was looking for. I jumped back up onto the bed and began to sort the articles on Edward Keller's crimes into chronological order. I didn't have everything on it, but I had enough to get a pretty good insight. The news report was correct. Edward Keller was a sick and twisted individual. From what I had gathered from the articles, his first victim was Kyle Taylor, aged 5, who was taken from his bedroom after Keller had already attacked his parents in the middle of the night. They had awoken to discover him breaking into their house. He proceeded to take out both parents with a hunting knife before Kyle was taken and never seen again. This was the first in a pattern of horrific incidents that began to occur in the area, where either parents would wake up to find their child missing, or they would wake up to hear a disturbance in the night, and when they would investigate, Keller would ambush them and brutally assault them with a large, sharp weapon, resulting in death. With no one to stop him, he would then snatch the newly made orphan from the house. None of the children that were taken were ever found alive. Until one day, Alex Jessup, a brave little boy, age 7, was taken in the night. His parents didn't hear a thing, so Keller had no reason to hurt them. After 5 days of depraved captivity, he managed to cut out of his restraints on a piece of glass and he got away. He ran straight home, where his parents and the police officers were waiting. Alex told the police who had taken him and where he had taken him. Police officers went straight to the location Alex gave, but Keller had already fled from the scene, knowing the boy would reveal his identity. The boy told a horrific story of his ordeal, which painted Edward Keller as a true monster among his fellow man. Keller took Alex to a local, isolated meat factory, which was owned by the Keller family. Keller and Waite Meats was a red meat factory owned by Edward Keller's father, Thomas Keller, and his uncle, Alan Waite. Both of them had died in recent years prior to 1997, leaving Edward the owner of the factory. Keller unfortunately didn't use the factory for business purposes. Instead, he used it as a front, covering the true purpose, which was for his own warped and sadistic pleasures. Alex Jessup told authorities that Keller had climbed in his window during the night. He said he woke up to see Mr. Keller standing over him, grinning and instructing him to be quiet. He then signaled with hand gestures that if he tried to wake his parents, he would, and I quote, slit them from chin to shin. Once he had Alex out of the house, he took them to said meat factory, where he was kept in a small room with a mattress. During his time there, he claimed that he had encountered another little boy. Based on the description that Jessup gave, this was the 19th victim, Mikey Wilson. He said Mikey looked on the brink of death. Alex claimed the child was begging for his mom and dad, but he claimed Keller would cackle theatrically every time and he would taunt the child, bragging about the horrible things he had done to Mikey's parents, promising him that no one was coming for him. Alex told authorities what Keller had done to Mikey, which unfortunately ended with him being put into a grinder. Alex recalls that Keller ate very well that night. With his energy levels replenished, he can now attempt to do the same thing to Alex as he did to Mikey. After 5 days of pure hell, Keller was going to fire up the grinder. During this, Alex was able to use that broken piece of glass and cut off his restraints. He fled from the factory. He ran for a number of miles before collapsing on a street. He was later found by a neighbor, who alerted his parents and the police who were with them. He had told them that the burger man had did it. By the time he had been attended to by the paramedics and given a physical description of Keller and the factory, Keller had made his escape. Authorities raided Keller's registered address in the factory but found no sign of him. They had set up checkpoints, cutting off any exit to the area. They had brought out the dogs who were given sweat-drenched items belonging to Keller that they had retrieved from the factory. The dogs tracked these sent to Wolf Lake National Park. They assumed his plan was to live off the land, hidden away in the dense forest, until the police presence around the checkpoints slackened. However, on the 22nd of December 2003, the authorities finally caught up with Mr. Keller. He was found hanging from a large oak tree. And just like that, Edward Keller's violent reign of abuse was over. I sat back, resting my shoulders against the cabin's sturdy walls. I realized I had been sweating. Reading about those poor kids going missing was bad enough, but to read those grisly details about what had become of them was a little bit too much for one night. It was sad to know that there were actual human beings out there capable of such things. Edward Keller was dead. He couldn't inherit any of these children or their parents anymore. Until my mind began to whirl. I swallowed hard as I remembered what Wendy Cartwright said that figure in the woods did, the finger over the lips and telling her to shh. I dug back, looking for the article about Alex Jessup. He had also said his abductor had done something similar when he tried to alert his parents. Had to be just a coincidence, right? Who doesn't tell people to shush with the finger and lip gesture? But then my heart sank again. I dove down the side of the bed once more, searching through the stack of newspapers looking for the Waldron story. When I found it, I checked the date that he went missing. The 22nd of December, 2004. It was exactly 1 year after the Keller death. Again, that must just be a coincidence, surely. I was trying to convince myself that I was just being stupid and some sort of conspiracy theorist nut job. That was until I glanced down at the spread of tabloids across the floor in bed, when one caught my eye. It had its top left corner peeking out from beneath a couple of others. The title was over 2 lines. The top one read, "Police discover sickening," and the bottom one read, "Burger Man kept." I don't know what it was, but something was telling me to read this article. Maybe it was the same energy that turned the channel over to the news. I grabbed the corner with 2 fingers and a thumb, and pulled out the rest of the paper. Revealing the title and the full article, it read, "Police discover sickening evidence in factory of horrors. Burger Man kept trophies of his 19 victims." Today the authorities searched the residence of Edward Dean Keller. 4 days ago, after being the target of a statewide manhunt, after he was wanted in connection with the murders of over 35 people, both adults and kids, the Wolf Lake Sheriff, Robert Farrar, today released this statement in regards to the findings. Today, we thoroughly and forensically searched the Keller properties. In the factory, we discovered various traces of DNA matching a large number of the missing victims. Alex Jessup claimed that Mr. Keller ate his victims after mincing their bodies. We have recovered traces of meat from the machine, and we can now confirm that Alex Jessup's claims were in fact true. We also discovered a floor tile that was loose in one of the rooms that he had imprisoned the victims. Under said tile, we discovered a floor space in which we recovered 19 pairs of underwear. All 19 pairs had been forensically linked to each missing victim. We also found various sharp and blunt weapons, which bared DNA related to each of the adult victims. Given these findings, we have no doubt in our minds that Mr. Keller was the man behind these horrific crimes. And while Mr. Keller was bold enough to do what he did, unfortunately, he wasn't man enough to stand trial for them. His cowardly death means he never has to face justice or punishment for his appalling actions. However, I am sure that the people of Wolf Lake will take some comfort in knowing that he is finally gone, and can't hurt any family or child ever again.